I'm curious, Claire, again, leveraging the inner source experience of teams that then go on to do more in the open source ecosystem. Have you found that they have a better understanding as to what are the general costs of upkeep of an open source project? Again, you can talk about, getting past the point of organizations being comfortable with contributing upstream. But then the second order effect of that is somebody has to review that code. Somebody has to be responsible for getting it in. And so when we hear in the open source ecosystem about maintainer burnout, it's usually because they're either a hobbyist and they've become far too popular to actually maintain the level of work that is involved in taking contributions from others, or it's a developer who's paid by his organization to do work in Linux or any other project, but they're only being really paid to do the feature development that the company needs, not the responsibilities of a maintainer that this person has risen to because of his technical competence and what he's done and his ability to gain influence in that ecosystem. So do you see any better cognition of folks who have done InnerSource to the additional costs of open source upkeep in the external world, or maybe not so much?
Well, I mightn't phrase it as being aware of the explicit costs. I don't think. I mean, in many respects, I mean, this may be again a gross generalization, but I'm not sure many developers would be making that value decision as to that kind of cost investment. Like, as you mentioned, either they're doing it because it's part of their job to do it, and they've been assigned that task, responsibility, to do that, and they're not necessarily thinking about the cost or anything like that.
Right.
What I will say is that once you have people working in that way, in the way of collaboration, like just in that open collaborative way, they like it better. So the conversation I've heard more is like, I want to do more, and how do I convince my boss that I can do more? So it's maybe it's less of them making a value decision to say, I'm going to independently decide as to whether or not my activities as a maintainer is going to give an ROI to my host company. It's not that. They're not making that kind of decision.
No. Well, I would expect that to be a decision for the management, and that's kind of what I was asking.
Oh, right. Oh, so in terms of the management, well, I mean, I do think so. It's interesting. What I've seen 2, 3, maybe if I talk about 3 types of scenarios in terms of the relationship between inner source and open source. The first is where someone has already made the decision, like management would have made the decision and understood the value of actually contributing to the open source ecosystem for whatever their motivation. And then they are using InnerSource as a way to get ready for open source, like very explicitly. We're doing it in a safe environment first because we don't want to do this in the wild with our developers who've never done this before. We want to get them experienced. We want to make sure the documentation's in place. We want to make sure that they understand what a pull request means, what really annoys people, what gets people on board, like all of those kind of behaviors and processes they can put in place before they go and do it in the wild. And then they're better able to be more successful by making those first experiences great when they go out into the open source environment. So that's one scenario, and that has been the case study, and certainly was the case studies for an awful lot of our early InnerSource adopters. That was explicitly what they were trying to do. Okay. Then you have the people who are build something with InnerSource, realize they've got something that's really sticky, like so. And I'll point to things like Backstage, like in terms of the actual developer portal that was being built by Spotify as an InnerSource project. Then they realized, hey, this is popular in terms of internal in Spotify. And then they're like, this might be popular external to Spotify. We could do something with this. And so that was almost, it wasn't necessarily, I don't believe it was from the get-go intended to be an open source project, but because they were able to successfully do it as an InnerSource project, they'll be like, well, we can get even more value if we make it external. And so that was an evolution from InnerSource to open source, as opposed to we always knew that was our end destination.
Right.
So that would be the second scenario. And then the third scenario, which maybe I don't know if management maybe are planning for it, but I do think it's going to become. I think indirectly they see the value. Would be this idea of the fact that if you have people who are experienced in doing InnerSource and do it well, and like working in that way, sometimes when they get involved in the open source projects, whether or not their management tells them to stay at it, they do. I mean, we have this thing about, certainly in InnerSource Commons, there was all this big conversation of whether or not, if people were doing InnerSource as their job, would they stay if that stopped being their job? And I think what we've experienced is that, you may come for your job, but you stay for the community. So in as much as some people may leave for a while, they come back or they stay altogether because they just like the community. So whether or not that is either an explicit goal of management from the get-go or becomes an evolved goal of management as they see the value, there is a indirect impact, which means that people who start working in this way want to do more in the community because they enjoy it from their personal perspective. Now, whether that's a satisfaction angle or maybe even a kind of a reputational, like building my experience angle, or they're doing it for knowledge gain, or they're doing it so that they can change career paths or whatever. But there's all sorts of motivation that happen at that individual level that I think, regardless of whether management explicitly wanted or not, they build people like maintainers and community managers and all those folks that become successful in an open source project. They're building the kinds of skills that management want, like organizational development people keep going, we want leaders who can communicate and get people to collaborate. And you're like, oh, there they are. You just built them. Yep. So, but without even knowing it, they're building the skills of the workforce of the future. So in that respect, whether or not they continue showing that value internally or externally, that by practicing those skills, they're providing value to the organization. Do management and folks know that? I know they know that it's a place to go to get talent. So I know they know that it's helping them in their recruitment. They're seeing value in that respect. I know they know it's helping them in terms of skills development, and in terms of relationship building in the field. So they're seeing value in that respect. Are they explicitly sending people out because of those things to begin with? Maybe not, but they see value in it.